Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. Lisa here. Been a hot second. I have a few topics that I want to do some off-the-cuff videos about, and I figured I would sit down and just talk about the biggest story in the news right now, which is this Titanic submersible disaster tragedy that happened. I want to talk about why I think this blew up and became a huge news story, and I also want to talk about why people felt comfortable to joke about it, or why that was kind of the tone of a lot of commentary about it. Not that I necessarily think that's wrong. I want to talk about why that was the reaction. Personally, and as soon as I heard about this news story, I didn't know that people were going as tourists to the Titanic. And my initial reaction, and my reaction still is, it's really sick and it's really morally and ethically wrong to go there as a thrill-seeking tourist. To go to this place where people died so tragically and horrifically in this real existentially dreadful way is sick. It's sick to want to do that. I'm not talking about going there for research sake or for science or something like that, because that is not what this mission was about. This was a tourist trip to a gravesite, and again, I think that's sick. Before I sat down to film this, I watched a video here on YouTube called The Final Hours of Titanic 2023 animation by Titanic Honor and Glory. It's just an incredible animation. You know, it's so real. It's second by second, minute by minute animation of how the ship sank and all the horrible things that happened as it sank for 2 hours. Just a horrible, horrible, horrible tragedy. What I want to talk about first of all in this video is why this was such a captivating news story. Once in a while, a news story comes along that sort of gets everybody glued to the screen as the details are coming in and things like that. People are like hungrily eating up every little detail that comes in. And this was one of those stories. And I read many people saying like, man, I haven't been this obsessed with a story since XYZ. And it has all those kind of elements of a really captivating story. So the story starts off with OceanGate Expeditions. CEO is a guy called Stockton Rush. He was interviewed by Bloomberg in 2017, and he, in that interview, described himself as born into wealth. Who describes themselves that way? First of all, that's really weird. I mean, even if you were, it's just a strange thing to say. But he was just of this upper crust wealthy class. That's a huge theme in all of this. There's this class of people who are doing things that we normies have no clue about. There is just this class of people who breathe a rarefied air. They have very little to do with normal people, and normal people have very little to do with them. And Stockton Rush was of that class of people. So he built this experimental submersible called the Titan, and it was not certified by any agency. It was not, met any kind of code for seaworthiness. Testing and safety, pretty much non-existent. That is wild for something that you're going to trust with your life. Stockton Rush fired people who warned him that this vessel was not safe. He didn't want to hear that. He wanted people around him who were yes people. And so he fired the engineers and stuff who said, this isn't right. And in their place, he hired young people who just really didn't have a clue, but were enthusiastic and inspirational. The guests on these tours, and apparently there have been quite a few before this fateful mission, paid $250,000 each, which is a huge amount of money for a one-day excursion. That's more than most people's life savings, let's be real. And they're spending that on a one-day excursion to Titanic. Totally wild and insane. But on the surface, there's nothing really terribly remarkable about this whole thing. Even the fact that it went wrong and they died. I mean, rich people climb Mount Everest and fall off the side and die kind of all the time. Rich people go on crazy safaris. They go on Jeff Bezos's rockets to outer space or whatever. We are desensitized to hearing about this stuff, and there's nothing like super remarkable about this case. And definitely the news coverage and people's interest in it was just totally disproportional to any effect that this has on any of our lives, which is zero. And I think one reason for the disproportional interest is just the absurdity of the whole thing as soon as you start to get into the details. As soon as you started to get into the details of the fact that there was one window on this thing the size of a dinner plate, and it was right above the toilet. Otherwise, they're looking at everything through a camera and a computer screen. If you're gonna look at everything through a camera and a computer screen, why not just stay up on the boat that's at the surface and send down a remote thing and, enjoy it that way, right? Why take on this huge risk in this experimental, unproven, untested, uncertified vessel, and there's one tiny window that's above a toilet? Totally absurd. When you see the size of this thing and the fact that it's barely big enough to fit one adult man sitting cross-legged, and the fact that there's going to be 5 adults crammed in there, again, it's so absurd that it's mind-boggling. Another absurd detail, this waiver that had the word death over and over and over again. Apparently, this waiver really kind of hit them over the head with the fact that death was a real possibility for these people. And the fact that the whole thing was controlled with a knockoff PS3 controller. Again, the absurdity of all of these details is just kind of jaw-dropping, and that's why people have been really drawn to this story. All of those absurd details add up to this idea that anyone with any common sense would not have gone on this trip. In a way, I think it allows us to feel superior to these billionaires. Us plebes can say, geez, I have more common sense than a billionaire. They would get on this shoddy craft, potentially throwing their lives away, which is what happened in the end, do this foolhardy adventure. Like, so many of us know better, and we would never do that. And yeah, it just allows us to feel like we're smarter than these people, which we very well may be. But maybe it's not a lack of common sense that's the reason these people got on this submersible. Maybe it is boredom. And that's another interesting thing to contemplate. I read something recently, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it was on some similar kind of folly where a person wrote, being rich must be really boring. And I actually think that there's something to that. I could say these people were so bored, they'd done everything else, is that they're willing to risk their life, seriously risk their lives, just to get a story to tell at like a cocktail party or something. They've done many studies that are earning up to a certain amount, I think it's like $70,000 or $80,000 a year, your happiness level increases. And once you hit that point where like your basic needs are taken care of, once those needs are all satisfied, more money actually does not bring you more happiness. We know also that controlling for access to healthcare, rich people take more antidepressants. I don't know. It's a lot of these things have kind of come up in conversations about this story. I think we're all also kind of marveling open-mouthed at the hubris that was displayed here. The CEO, Stockton Rush, said things about how he wants to break rules, and that the rules that are in place and the guidelines that are in place for creating a submersible to go to the bottom of the ocean, that they're so restricting and they're hurting innovation and all this kind of stuff. That hubris, that feeling that rules don't apply to you. Again, this is a guy who said, I was born into wealth. I think these are people who've probably never been told no in their lives, or they're used to just kind of getting their way with everything. And it's not that way with Mother Nature. When you go to the top of a mountain or you go deep under the sea, like, these are unforgiving environments, and there are places where your billions of dollars don't mean anything, and there are places where your money can't get you out of a bind. The rules that apply to everybody else apply to you too. It is sort of like the universal equalizer, right? I think another reason the story became huge is because of the sort of existential horror of the whole thing, considering it. I really did think from first hearing about the story that the thing probably imploded. It probably was a design failure. The pressure is so great down there. But a lot of people were kind of imagining in their minds what it would be like to be stuck in this cramped little coffin, running out of oxygen, surrounded by the smell of human waste and stuff like that. And this sort of existential horror, I think, really tapped into something for people that they like to imagine. If you can let your brain go there, it's just a crazy, mind-bending kind of thought experiment. And that's kind of where I think a lot of the jokes and stuff came in, is that this is really a horrifying thing to contemplate. And humor is like a coping mechanism in a situation like that. So I don't begrudge people making jokes about this. So I think you should have compassion for the loss of any life. I kind of also get it. It is like a coping mechanism to deal with like how dreadful this whole thing seems. And a lot of people do see billionaires and stuff as supervillains, which I'm not going to say that they're not. I don't know these specific people, but in general, like, I don't have a really high opinion of billionaires, okay? There really is no such thing as like being an ethical or moral or anything billionaire. People don't get to be billionaires without exploiting other people. It's just really baked into the nature of being a billionaire. And I think this story does highlight kind of the worst aspect of billionaires. This hubris, this feeling like rules don't apply to you, this feeling of recklessness and carelessness. And if you get into trouble, someone else is gonna help get you out of trouble. The idea of the probably millions of dollars spent on the rescue effort, which was ultimately obviously unsuccessful. It's a total folly. I heard one person describe it as Jurassic Park in real life, and I think that's a perfect description. It's like people just feeling like they could do whatever they want and there are no consequences and they can get away with anything. I understand why it's hard for people to have sympathy or empathy or whatever, compassion for people who acted like that. I mean, it's honestly not the greatest way to act, to go as tourists to a grave site, for the CEO to try to make this into a, for-profit money-making endeavor over visiting a site where people died, feeling like the laws of Mother Nature don't apply to you, not doing any kind of due diligence. Like, the whole thing is just, the irony in this is that this event was like a little mini version of the Titanic itself, right? Because the captain of the Titanic was warned about icebergs and he went full steam ahead into iceberg country. And this same thing, people actually warned this guy, Stockton Rush, your vessel is not safe. And he was like, forget it, I'm going anyways. We're going full steam ahead, right? And the same thing happened to the Titanic, has now happened to the Titan. And then, of course, speaking of sinking ships, a migrant ship carrying Pakistani refugees sank near Greece. That story has been so overshadowed by this story in the media that we've just sort of like barely heard little bits of it, right? The story of those people who were just trying to live life and survive and get to a place where they could like live a fulfilling life in safety and everything. The fact that that was overshadowed by this story about billionaires' follies, I think, is another thing that's really kind of disgusted people. And it just says so much about where we're at as a society. In a sense, the whole thing is a tragedy. And I do have to say that having read so much about this and heard so much news about it and followed it, like, I just did actually feel a lot of gratitude for just simply going about my day today and being here and existing. And it does act as a reminder of how precious life is. It was an accident, ultimately, what happened to them. It was definitely probably foreseeable. and preventable and stuff like that. Things happen, and I don't know. It's always good to have gratitude for being here, for breathing, and being able to look around and experience this world, and being with people you love and all that kind of stuff. So any reminder to have gratitude for those things is good. Unfortunately, people did lose their lives. Anyways, those are just some of my thoughts on it. I would love to hear what you guys thought, if you were following this story at all. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you soon, and would love to hear your thoughts. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.